Jason Sterling stood at the panoramic window of his penthouse, absent-mindedly gazing out at the lights of Manhattan at night. In his 45 years, he had achieved everything he could have dreamed of. A successful technology company, a billion-dollar fortune, a life of luxury. But something was missing, something important. The ringing of the phone snapped him out of his reverie. The name Emily Chen popped up on the screen. "Jason, are you there?" A familiar voice sounded in the receiver. "Yes, Em. What's wrong?" he replied, trying to hide the tiredness in his voice. "Did you forget? We're having an investor dinner tonight. Everyone's just waiting for you." Jason sighed heavily. "Damn, completely slipped my mind. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Are you okay?" Emily's voice sounded worried. "Yeah, just brooding. Never mind." "Okay, hurry up, okay?" Jason hung up the phone and walked over to the bar. Pouring himself a whiskey, he took a sip and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The expensive suit fit perfectly, but his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. "Who can I trust?" he whispered to himself. Half an hour later, Jason was entering a luxurious restaurant on the Upper East Side. Emily met him at the entrance. "Finally, I thought I was going to have to send a search party," she smiled. "Sorry, traffic," Jason lied. Emily looked at him carefully. "You seem kind of tense. Are you sure everything's okay?" "Everything's great," he smiled, strained. "Let's not keep the guests waiting." They entered a separate room where 5 men in expensive suits were already waiting for them. Jason instantly switched into charismatic businessman mode. "Gentlemen, I apologize for being late. I hope you haven't waited too long." One of the men, a gray-haired gentleman in his 60s, stepped up to meet them. "Mr. Sterling, we would have waited all night for you." "Oh, Robert, don't exaggerate," Jason laughed, shaking his hand. "Let me introduce you to Emily Chen, the CFO of Sterling Tech." Emily said hello to everyone and the company settled around the table. Waiters immediately began pouring champagne. "So, gentlemen," Jason began, raising his glass, "I'm delighted to welcome you to this informal dinner. I hope we can not only discuss business but also get to know each other a little better." Throughout the evening, Jason shined, telling jokes, sharing his company's growth plans, charming investors. But there was a strange sense of alienation growing inside him. He looked at these people and thought, who among them is really happy to see me? Who really cares about me? As dinner was coming to an end, Robert took Jason aside. "Jason, my boy, you were on fire tonight. I'm impressed." "Thank you, Robert. Your opinion means a lot to me." "Listen," Robert lowered his voice. "I have a proposition. I didn't want to say in front of everyone, but how about we combine our companies? Together we could take over the whole market." Jason looked at Robert carefully. "That's an interesting suggestion. Let's discuss it next week in a more relaxed setting." Sure. I'll send my secretary over to set up a meeting." When everyone had dispersed, Emily approached Jason. "So, are you happy with the result?" "I guess so," he replied absent-mindedly. "Sort of?" "Jason, they were thrilled, especially Robert. What did he say to you in private?" Jason hesitated. "Suggested we merge companies." Emily's eyes widened. "Really? That's an amazing opportunity." "Maybe," Jason shrugged. Emily frowned. "Okay, spill it out. What's going on with you? You haven't been yourself lately." Jason sighed. "Let's go for a walk. I don't want to talk here." They left the restaurant and walked slowly down the night street. Jason was silent for a few minutes, gathering his thoughts. Have you ever thought about how much this whole thing is fake?" "What do you mean?" "About all this." He circled the street with his hand. "About our lives, about the people around us. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in some reality show where everyone smiles and says the right things, but there's nothing behind it." Emily stopped and turned to him. "Jason, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He looked into her eyes. "I don't know who I can trust, Em. There are so many people around me, but which one is a true friend? Who will stick by me if I suddenly lose everything? You're talking nonsense, Emily frowned. You have friends. You have me. Really? Jason grinned bitterly. What if I wasn't a billionaire? If I couldn't provide you with this job and all these privileges? Emily recoiled as if slapped. How can you say that? I thought you knew me better than that. I'm sorry. Jason rubbed his face with his hands. I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, I don't know what to believe anymore. Emily was silent for a few seconds, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Look, I don't know what you're going through right now, but I'm here. I'll always be here. Do you hear me? Not because of money or status, but because you're my friend. Jason looked at her, and something resembling hope flashed in his eyes. Thanks, Em. Yeah, I have a lot to think about. Do you want to talk about it? Not right now. I need to be alone. I'll see you at the office tomorrow, okay? Emily nodded, still concerned. Okay, but if you need anything, call me anytime. Jason caught a cab and headed home. He stared out the window the whole way, but he couldn't see the city beyond the glass. A plan was maturing in his head, a crazy, risky plan that could cost him everything. I have to know the truth, he whispered to himself, even if I don't like it. The next morning found Jason in his home office. He had stayed up all night thinking over his plan and calculating all the possible consequences. When the first rays of sunlight colored the sky over Manhattan, he already knew exactly what he was going to do. Jason dialed his lawyer's number. Michael? It's Jason. I'm sorry to call you early, but I need your help. It's confidential. Jason? What's wrong? Michael's voice sounded concerned. Nothing's wrong, but I want to meet as soon as possible. Can you come to my house in an hour? Sure, I'll be at your place. Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Jason opened it and saw Michael Donovan, his attorney and friend for 20 years. Come in. Jason gestured him into the office. Michael looked at his friend carefully. You look lousy. Didn't sleep? Didn't have time for that. Jason poured them both coffee. Have a seat. I've got a serious conversation to have with you. They sat down in the chairs by the fireplace. Jason took a sip of coffee and began. Michael, you're my friend and my lawyer. I trust you more than I trust anyone. What I'm about to say must remain strictly between us. Michael frowned. Of course. You know I want to fake my bankruptcy, Jason interrupted him. Michael choked on his coffee. What? Are you crazy? Maybe, Jason grinned. But I have my reasons. What the hell reasons could a billionaire have for pretending to be bankrupt? Jason stood up and walked over to the window. I want to find out who my real friends are, who will stay with me if I lose everything. Michael looked at him in disbelief. Jason, this is crazy. You're risking everything. Your reputation, your company. Come on, maybe even your freedom. Do you realize that fake bankruptcy is a felony? That's why I need your help, Jason turned to his friend. You're the best lawyer I know. You can work out a scheme so that everything is legal. Michael shook his head. Even if I can find loopholes in the law, it's still a hell of a risk. You could lose everything for real. I'm willing to take that risk, Jason said firmly. What about your employees, the shareholders? Have you thought about them? Jason sighed. I've thought it through. We'll set up a fund that will secretly control most of the assets. No one will really get hurt. Michael stood up and started pacing the room. Jason, listen. I realize you're going through some kind of crisis right now, but this isn't the way out. Let's do better. Michael, Jason interrupted him. I've already made up my mind. The question isn't whether or not to do it. The question is whether or not you're going to help me. Michael stopped and looked at his friend carefully. In Jason's eyes, he saw a determination bordering on obsession. He knew that look. It was the one Jason had built his empire with. The hell with you, Michael sighed. I'll help, But be warned, if anything goes wrong, I wash my hands of it." "Thanks, friend." Jason smiled for the first time in a long time. "I knew I could count on you." They spent the next few hours working out the details of the plan. Michael suggested setting up a network of shell companies through which they could control the assets without attracting attention. Jason insisted that some of the money actually be lost, just to be convincing. "Are you willing to actually lose millions of dollars for this crazy experiment?" Michael shook his head. "Money can be made again." Jason shrugged. Real friends, on the other hand, are harder to find. When the basic details were agreed upon, Jason leaned back in his chair. "Now we need to decide who to let in on the plan." "The fewer people who know, the better," Michael pointed out. "Agreed, but we need someone inside the company. Someone I can trust 100%. "Emily?" Michael suggested. Jason hesitated for a moment. Emily was his right hand in the business and a close friend, but it was her reaction to his downfall that he wanted to see the most. "No," he finally said. "Emily has to believe that I'm broke. Her reaction will be key." "Then who?" "Lisa, I think," Jason said, his ex-wife's name. Michael raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you sure? It's not like you two haven't been on the best of terms since the divorce." "That's exactly why," Jason nodded. "No one will suspect we're on the same page. Besides, she knows me better than anyone. If anyone can help make my fall convincing, it's her." "Okay, you're right," Michael agreed. "When do you plan to start?" "The sooner the better. Give me a week to prepare and we'll get this play up and running." Michael stood up, getting ready to leave. "Jason, for the last time, are you sure you want to do this?" Jason looked his friend in the eye. "Absolutely. I need to know the truth." When Michael left, Jason dialed Lisa's number. After 3 beeps, she answered. "Jason? What's wrong?" Surprise could be heard in her voice. "Hey, Liz, we need to meet. It's important." "Are you okay?" There was concern in her tone now. "Yeah, no. Hell, I don't even know how to explain. Just come over, okay?" There was a pause. "Okay," Lisa finally said. "I'll be there in an hour." Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Jason opened it and saw Lisa, still as beautiful as she had been on their wedding day 15 years ago. "Come on in." He gestured her into the living room. Lisa entered, looking around. "Nothing has changed," she remarked. "Why change what works?" Jason shrugged. They sat down on the couch. There was an awkward pause. "So," Lisa finally broke the silence, "what did you want to talk about?" Jason took a deep breath. "Liz, what I'm about to say is going to seem crazy, but I need your help." He told her his plan. With each word, Liz's eyes widened more and more. "You're crazy," she exhaled when he was done. "Maybe I am," Jason agreed, "but I have to do this." "Why? Why risk everything you've built?" Jason stood up and walked over to the window. "Remember how we started out? Living in a tiny apartment, barely making ends meet. But we were happy because we had friends. Real friends." Lisa was silent, and he continued. "Now look at me. I have everything one could dream of, but I don't know who I can trust, who's around me for money and who's around me for real." "And you think this crazy plan is going to help you figure that out?" Lisa asked skeptically. "Yes," Jason said firmly. "I'll see who stays around when everything falls apart." Lisa shook her head. "Have you ever thought that you might lose the people who really love you? People might turn away not because you're impoverished, but because you've deceived them." Those words made Jason think. He hadn't considered that option. "Yeah, I'm willing to take the risk," he finally said. "If someone turns away because of this, then our friendship wasn't real." Lisa stood up and walked over to him. "Jason, listen. I know you better than anyone. You've always been obsessed with control, always wanting to calculate everything. But life isn't a business plan. You can't control people's feelings." "Maybe," he looked into her eyes, "but I can find out the truth. Liz, will you help me?" She was silent for a long time, studying his face. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, I'll help you, but not because I agree with your plan. It's because I know, if I say no, you'll do it anyway, and probably do more stupid things." Jason smiled. "Thanks, Liz. I knew I could count on you." "Don't thank me," she shook her head. "Better tell me, where do we start?" The next few days passed in feverish preparation. Jason, Michael, and Lisa worked practically around the clock to create the illusion of financial collapse. Michael handled the legal side of things, creating a network of shell companies and moving assets around. Lisa helped with the emotional component, suggesting how Jason should behave to make his downfall look convincing. "You have to look depressed, but not broken," she instructed him. "People need to see that you're struggling but having a hard time staying afloat." "Like I'm back in our college years again?" Jason grinned. "Exactly," Lisa nodded. "Only now you don't have that youthful confidence that everything's going to be okay." Jason listened intently and memorized every detail. He'd always been a good actor, a quality that had helped him in business more than once. But now he had the most important role of his life to play. Finally, it was X Day. Jason called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. All the key people in the company, including Emily, were gathered in the boardroom. Jason was the last to enter the room. Everyone immediately noticed that he looked different than usual. Instead of a perfectly fitting suit, his shirt was crumpled and his tie was off to the side. There were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in several nights. "Gentlemen," he began in a hoarse voice, "I have some bad news." A tense silence hung in the hall. Jason took a deep breath and continued. "Our company is on the verge of bankruptcy. We have lost control of key assets. If we don't find a major investor soon, we will have to declare insolvency." A murmur went up in the hall. Board members began to whisper, some demanding explanations. Emily sat pale, keeping her eyes on Jason. "How could this have happened?" one of the directors asked. "Everything was fine a week ago." Jason shook his head. "It's my own fault. I made some risky investments. Thought I could increase our assets many times over, but the market crashed and we lost everything." "How much?" Emily asked quietly. "Almost everything." Jason lowered his eyes. "We have assets left for barely a month's work." There was a sepulchral silence in the room. Jason looked around at the faces of those present. Shock, disbelief, anger. He saw a whole range of emotions. And somewhere in the back of his mind he was afraid. What if he really had ruined everything? "What now?" someone asked. "Now," Jason straightened up, "we fight. I've let you all down, but I'm going to do everything I can to make things right. I need your help and support. Together we can get out of this hole." He spoke confidently, but inside everything clenched. This was the moment of truth. Now he would see who would stay with him and who would run from the sinking ship. After the meeting, Emily caught up with him in the hallway. "Jason, wait!" He turned around. Emily looked shocked, but determination burned in her eyes. "I'm with you," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, we'll get through this together." Jason felt a lump come up to his throat. He wanted to tell her the truth, to hug her, to thank her for her loyalty. But instead he just nodded and said hoarsely, "Thanks, Em. I really need this right now." That evening, news of Sterling Tech's financial problems leaked to the press. Jason's phone was bursting with calls from reporters, partners, acquaintances. He answered only select calls, trying to maintain the image of a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Late one night, a call came from Robert. "Jason, my boy, I just found out. Is it true?" "Yes, Robert," Jason replied tiredly. "I've lost everything." "But how? After all, just a short time ago we were discussing merging our companies." "It doesn't matter now," Jason grinned bitterly. I have nothing left, Robert. Sterling Tech is bankrupt. A heavy pause hung on the other end of the line. Jason could almost physically feel the gears turning in Robert's head, calculating every possible option. Listen, Jason, Robert finally spoke up. I realize you're desperate right now, but let's not jump to conclusions. Come to my place tomorrow and we'll talk things over. I'm sure we can find a way out. Jason closed his eyes. This was the first test. Was Robert driven by a sincere desire to help or by calculation? Does he want to support his friend in a time of need, or is he just trying to salvage a potentially lucrative deal? Thank you, Robert, he finally answered. Yeah, I'll think about your offer. Hanging up the phone, Jason sank heavily into his chair. His plan was working. People's reactions were exactly as he had envisioned. But somehow it wasn't satisfying. On the contrary, with each call, each message, he felt a weight growing on his shoulders. The phone rang. Jason looked at the screen. Lisa. How are you? She asked without preamble. Fine, he answered automatically. Jason. Annoyance could be heard in her voice. Don't lie to me. I know you. He sighed. Honestly? That sucks. I didn't think it would be so hard. What did you expect? Lisa's voice was a mixture of sympathy and reproach. You're playing with the feelings of people who trust you. I know, Jason said quietly, but I have to find out the truth. And what is it? That truth? Lisa asked. What have you learned so far today? Jason hesitated. Emily. She stayed with me, said we'd get through this together no matter what happened. And you're surprised. A smile could be heard in Lisa's voice. That girl has been looking at you with loving eyes ever since you hired her. What? No, you're wrong. We're just friends. Oh, Jason, Lisa sighed. For a genius, you can be remarkably blind, but that's none of my business. What else? Jason told her about Robert's call. Lisa stretched out thoughtfully. Now that's interesting. You do realize he's probably going to try to buy your company for nothing, right? Yeah, I think so too, Jason agreed. The question is whether he sees it as helping a friend or just trying to cash in on my misfortune. Is there a difference? Lisa asked. There's rarely pure altruism in business. Maybe he genuinely wants to help, but he also doesn't mind making money. Does that make him a bad person? Jason wondered. Lisa had hit the mark as always. He'd been so focused on finding real friends that he'd forgotten the complexity of human relationships. People were rarely only black or only white. You're right, he finally said. As always. Of course I'm right, Lisa grinned. That's why you called me in to help with this crazy plan. They talked some more, and Jason felt the tension release a little. Lisa always had a way of putting his thoughts in order. The next morning started with another shock. Jason turned on the TV and saw his face all over the news channels. Tech giant collapse. Billionaire overnight became bankrupt. End of the Sterling Tech era. The headline screamed his downfall. He stared at the screen and a strange feeling grew inside. On the one hand, it was exactly what he'd wanted. His collapse made public. On the other, seeing what he had spent years building crumble was unbearably painful, even knowing it was only an illusion. The phone rang. Jason saw Samantha's name on the screen and hesitated for a second. Samantha was one of the people he considered a close friend. It was her reaction that was going to be one of the key points of his experiment. Hello, he finally answered, trying to keep his voice sounding tired and depressed. Jason, oh my God, I just saw the news. Is it true? Samantha's voice sounded excited. Yes, Sam, it's true. I lost everything. He paused as if trying to control his emotions. But how could this have happened? I mean, you were always in control. Jason mentally praised himself. His reputation for being in control made his fall all the more shocking. I made a mistake, Sam. Made some risky bets and lost. Now I'm on the verge of bankruptcy." Silence hung on the other end of the line. Jason could almost physically feel Samantha trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "Jason, listen," she finally said. "I know this is hard for you right now, but you're strong. You'll get through this. I believe in you." He felt a lump come up to his throat. Her words sounded sincere, but there was something else in them, something he couldn't quite grasp. "Thank you, Sam. Your support means a lot to me. You know what?" Samantha suddenly perked up. "Come over to my place tonight. I'll throw a small dinner just for close friends. You need a distraction to unwind." Jason was confused for a second. He hadn't expected such a suggestion. "I don't know, Sam. I'm not in the mood to—" "No objections," Samantha interrupted him. "You need the support of your friends. I expect you at 8. She hung up, not giving him a chance to refuse. Jason looked at the phone thoughtfully. What was it? A sincere desire to support a friend or something else? He dialed Michael's number. "Did you see the news?" he asked as soon as the lawyer answered. "Yeah, looking through it now." Michael could hear the tension in his voice. "Jason, it looks very convincing, maybe a little too convincing. Are you sure we haven't overreached?" "Everything is going according to plan," Jason replied. "Listen, Samantha invited me to dinner tonight, says she's gathering some close friends." "And you're going?" Michael could hear the doubt in his voice. "I think I will. It's a good opportunity to see people's reactions up close." "Be careful," Michael warned. "Remember to look depressed, but not broken. And most importantly, don't let it slip." "Don't worry," Jason grinned. "I'm a good actor." That evening, Jason drove up to Samantha's house. He purposely chose a less expensive car from his garage and dressed in a simple sweater and jeans instead of his usual suit. Before getting out of the car, he looked at himself in the mirror. The tired look, the slight unshavenness, the image of a man going through hard times was flawless. Samantha met him at the door. "Jason, I'm so glad you came." She hugged him and led him into the living room. To Jason's surprise, there were only a few people in the room. He recognized Robert, the Anderson couple, owners of a large hotel chain, and Mark Fisher, a well-known venture capitalist. "There's our hero of the day," Robert exclaimed, walking up to meet him. Jason inwardly tensed. What was happening was looking less and less like a friendly meeting and more like a business negotiation. "Hello, Robert." He shook the outstretched hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, Samantha kindly invited me when she learned of your predicament." Robert put a hand on his shoulder. "We're all here to help you, my boy." Jason looked around the room. Everyone looked at him with sympathy, but he saw something else in their eyes as well. Interest? A calculation? "Thanks, but I'm not sure I deserve that kind of attention." He tried to feign embarrassment. "Don't be silly," Samantha intervened. "You're our friend, and we're not going to leave you in the lurch, right, guys?" Everyone nodded and began to offer their help. Robert started talking again about a possible merger of the companies. The Andersons offered an investment in exchange for a stake in Sterling Tech. Mark Fisher hinted at the possibility of bringing in new investors. As Jason listened to their proposals, a strange feeling grew inside him. On the one hand, he was touched that these people were willing to help him in his time of need. On the other hand, he could clearly see that each of them was looking to benefit themselves. I don't know what to say," he finally uttered, trying to keep his voice sounding confused. "I need some time to think it over." Of course," Robert nodded. "We realize you're in shock right now, but remember, we're on your side." Dinner continued, and Jason felt more and more like he was being interrogated. Everyone was trying to find out the details of his financial situation, to probe the ground for possible deals. He played the part of the downtrodden but grateful friend carefully, watching the reactions of those around him. As the evening drew to a close, Jason felt emotionally drained. The game of fallen billionaire had been more difficult than he had anticipated. After saying goodbye to everyone, he went outside. The night air freshened his head a little. Jason got into his car, but he didn't hurry to start the engine. Instead, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed Lisa's number. "How'd it go?" she asked in lieu of a greeting. "You know, I thought this experiment would give me clear answers, that I'd be able to separate people into real friends and pretenders. But it turned out to be a lot more complicated than that," Jason sighed. "Tell me more about it," Lisa asked softly. Jason began to talk about the evening at Samantha's, about people's reactions, about offers of help that were both business proposals. The more he talked, the clearer he realized how confusing the situation was. You see, they all really wanted to help, but in doing so, everyone was looking to benefit themselves. And I can't blame them for that. Haven't I done the same thing myself all these years? Lisa was silent, giving him a chance to speak. And I also realized that maybe I don't know these people as well as I thought I did. Robert, for example. I always thought of him as a bit of a predatory in the business world. But today I saw genuine concern in his eyes. Yes, he wants to buy my company, but he seems genuinely worried about me. "People are more complicated than we like to think," Lisa observed. "Exactly," Jason agreed. "And you know what the weirdest thing is? I'm starting to doubt the validity of this whole plan. What if I don't find out the truth and just make things more complicated?" "You can always stop," Lisa reminded him. Jason shook his head even though he knew she couldn't see it. "No, I've gone too far. Now I have to go all the way." After talking to Lisa, Jason sat in the car for a long time longer, pondering the events of the evening. Finally, he started the engine and drove home, feeling that this night was going to be a sleepless one. The next morning began with an unexpected phone call. Jason barely had time to open his eyes before his phone rang insistently. Emily's name popped up on the screen. "Hello?" he mumbled sleepily. "Jason, thank God you're answering. Have you seen the news?" Emily's voice sounded excited. "What news?" Jason was instantly awake. A panicked thought flashed through his mind. Had their plan been discovered? "Turn on any financial channel, right now." Jason grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. On the screen, he saw his picture next to the Sterling Tech logo. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Sterling Tech shares plummet 70% after bankruptcy rumors." "Damn," Jason exhaled. He had expected the stock to drop, but not this dramatic. "Jason, what do we do?" Emily could hear the desperation in his voice. "Investors are panicking, employees are calling and asking if it's true that the company is closing. It's a nightmare." Jason felt everything squeeze inside. It was one thing to play the part of a broke billionaire in front of his friends, and quite another to see panic gripping the company he'd spent years building. "Emily, listen to me," he tried to make his voice sound confident. "Call an emergency meeting of all department heads, in an hour in the main conference room. I'll be there to explain everything." "Okay." Emily seemed to calm down a bit. "But Jason, you have a plan, don't you?" "I do," he lied. "Don't worry, we can handle it." Hanging up the phone, Jason dialed Michael's number in a panic. "Did you see it?" he asked without preamble as soon as the lawyer answered. "Yeah, I'm already in the office trying to sort out this chaos." Michael could hear the tension in his voice. "Jason, this is getting out of hand. We didn't take into account how much the market would react to the rumors." "I know, damn it." Jason started pacing around the room. "What are we supposed to do? We can't let the company actually go bankrupt." "I have an idea," Michael said after a pause, "but you're not going to like it." "Go ahead." "We can use some of that money we've moved offshore. Buy back some of the shares through shell companies. Stabilize the exchange rate." Jason hesitated. That would mean using real money to maintain the illusion, but there seemed to be no choice. Do it, he finally said. But be careful. We mustn't be exposed. Understood. I'll get on it right away. Jason hung up the phone and looked at his watch. He had less than an hour to clean himself up and figure out what to say to the staff. Exactly 1 hour later, he was standing in front of Sterling Tech's main conference room. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the doors and walked in. There was an atmosphere of overwhelm and fear in the room. All eyes instantly turned to him. Jason saw a multitude of emotions in the eyes of his co-workers: fear, disbelief, disappointment, hope. "Good morning," he began, trying to make his voice sound confident. "I know you've all seen the news. I know you're scared and confused, and I'm here to tell you the truth." He paused, circling the room with his gaze. "Yes, our company has fallen on hard times. Yes, we have suffered serious losses. But," he raised his voice, "Sterling Tech is not bankrupt, and it won't be bankrupt as long as I'm alive." A whisper ran through the room. Jason continued, "I've made mistakes. As a leader, as a strategist, as a human being. I have failed you all, and for that I am unforgivable. But I swear to you, I will do everything I can to make things right." He began to talk about the company's restructuring plans, about new strategies, about negotiations with investors. Half of it he was making up as he went along, but he spoke with such conviction that he began to believe in his own words. "We're going to have some tough times ahead of us," he finished his speech. "We're going to have to tighten our belts, work harder than ever. But I believe in this company. I believe in you, and together we will endure." When he finished, there was silence in the hall, and then someone started applauding. A second later, the applause was joined by everyone else. Jason stood looking at his staff and felt a strange feeling grow inside. Pride? Shame? He couldn't figure it out. After the meeting, Emily approached him. "That was impressive," she said. "Do you really believe we can do this?" Jason looked into her eyes and suddenly realized he couldn't lie anymore. At least, not to her. "Emily, we need to talk. Alone." They walked to his office. Jason closed the door and turned to Emily. "What I'm about to say must not leave this room. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, her eyes widening with excitement. Jason took a deep breath and began to talk. About his doubts, about his fake bankruptcy plan, about wanting to see who would stay with him in his time of need. With each word, he saw Emily's expression change from shock to disbelief, then to anger. You set this whole thing up?" She finally squeezed out. "For some kind of experiment?" "I know it sounds crazy." Jason tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "But I had to find out the truth." "The truth?" Emily laughed bitterly. "What truth, Jason? That people can be complicated? That there's no room for pure altruism in business? You really didn't know that before?" Jason was silent. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. "Have you thought about the consequences?" Emily continued. "About the people who might have lost their jobs, about the investors who lost millions on the stock drop, about the company's reputation?" I was in control," Jason tried to justify himself. "I had a plan." "A plan?" Emily interrupted him. "Your plan almost ruined the company. If it hadn't been for Michael's quick reaction with the stock buyback, we'd really be on the verge of bankruptcy right now." Jason felt the ground go from under his feet. He thought he was in control of the situation, but he was actually on the cusp of disaster. "Emily, He took a step toward her, but she backed away. "Don't." She held up a hand, stopping him. "I don't know what to say, Jason. I thought I knew you. That we—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Jason suddenly realized what she was saying. All these years, Emily hadn't been there for money or career. She really cared about him. And he, in his obsession with the truth, hadn't even noticed it. "I need time," Emily finally said. Time to think things through and decide if I can continue to work with a man who plays on the feelings of others so easily." With those words, she walked out of the office, leaving Jason alone. He sank into his chair, feeling completely drained. His experiment had turned into a nightmare. He'd risked everything: his company, his reputation, his relationships with people. And for what? To find out what, deep down, he'd always known? Jason pulled out his cell phone and dialed Lisa's number. "I need your help," he said as soon as she answered. "I've messed up, and I don't know how to fix it." "I'm on my way," Lisa said simply. An hour later, they were sitting in his office. Jason had told her about everything: the market reaction, the meeting with the staff, the conversation with Emily. "Well," Lisa sighed when he was done, "you definitely got your truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Jason looked at her puzzled. "What do you mean? Or are you going to admit your mistake and try to make things right?" Lisa finished for him. Jason was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the panorama of the city. The empire he'd spent years building was on the verge of collapse because of his own actions. And for what? For the sake of a truth that was far more complicated than he could have imagined. "You're right," he finally said. "We need to set things right. But how? I'm not sure people can forgive me." Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. "Start with the truth, Jason. The real truth. No games or manipulation." The next few days turned into a real marathon for Jason. He called a press conference to tell the whole truth about his experiment. The reaction was predictably negative. Journalists pounced on him with accusations of irresponsibility and manipulation. But Jason didn't give up. He met with each major investor personally, explaining the situation and offering compensation for the inconvenience. Many were angry, some threatened legal action, but most, seeing his sincere remorse, agreed to give him a second chance. The hardest part was talking to the employees of the company. Jason gathered everyone in the main conference room and, standing in front of them, felt more vulnerable than ever. "I've let you down," he began. "I've risked your careers, your future for my own selfish ends. I have no excuse." There was a sepulchral silence in the hall. Jason could see the disappointment, the anger, the disbelief in people's eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm only asking for a chance to undo what I've done. If you're willing to give me that chance, I swear I'll do my best to honor your trust." After the meeting, Emily approached him. Her face was impenetrable. "I'm still not sure I can trust you," she said, "but I have faith in this company and the people who work here. If you really want to make things right, I'll help." Jason felt a lump come up to his throat. "Thank you, Em. I won't let you down again." The next few months became a real challenge for Jason. He worked days and nights trying to regain the trust of investors and partners. Every decision, every move was now scrutinized. Jason learned to listen to his employees, to value their opinions, and to trust their experience. Gradually, the company's fortunes began to improve. Sterling Tech's stock slowly but surely crept upward. New projects attracted the attention of investors. But most importantly, Jason himself changed. He was no longer looking for true friends or absolute loyalty. Instead, he learned to appreciate the complexity of human relationships, to realize that people can be both loyal and self-interested. One evening, almost a year after his experiment began, Jason sat in his office reviewing financial reports. The company had not only recovered, but had surpassed its previous performance. There was a knock on the door. It was Emily. "Are you still here?" she asked with a smile. "It's almost midnight." Jason leaned back in his chair. "Just wanted to make sure everything was in order before the board meeting tomorrow." Emily walked over and sat across from him. "Jason, you've changed," she said after a pause. "For the better, I hope?" He tried to joke, but you could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Definitely," Emily nodded. You've become more human, more open, more considerate of others. Jason hesitated. You know, I've realized one thing. Real friendships, real relationships, they're not in big words or grand gestures. They're in the everyday little things, in the willingness to be there for each other in good times and bad. Emily smiled. Who would have thought you'd need to have a financial crisis for that realization? They both laughed, and Jason felt the last of the tension between them fade. Emily, he said, suddenly serious, thank you for not leaving me even when I deserved it. She looked into his eyes. Isn't that what friends are for? In that moment, Jason realized he'd found what he'd been looking for all along. Not a perfect friendship or absolute loyalty, but something far more valuable, a genuine, complicated, imperfect, but no less beautiful human relationship. He stood up and walked over to the window. The city below shone with lights, full of life and possibility. Jason smiled, feeling ready for new challenges, but this time not alone, but with people he had learned to trust and value. His experiment was over, but the real journey was just beginning.